Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. And this, folks, is the offseason. This is as offseason as it gets right here. The final football game for the 2025 season happened last night, Super Bowl. Perhaps you saw it. And now we have no football for a very long time. And unfortunately, now the pro football playoffs, the NFL, delivered many very entertaining playoff games. I would say for the most part last night was not really that, but we will talk some about that today because it is sort of our tradition. Obviously, the Super Bowl is so big that it almost swallows up all the other football news. So we'll have some on that and some other stuff too, including, I think, a pretty interesting stat that got shared with me a bunch, and that's usually a pretty good indication that's maybe something we should talk about. That, plus, speaking of the Super Bowl, how about the former Super Bowl champion, Jon Stinchcomb, to join us here today? So all of that is on the way. Hope you are doing great. We're glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management. They handle bugs and critters.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Every day for our show, one of the things that we do is we give the show a headline. Each show has a unique headline. Many of you just click into the show when you see it show up on your feed, or you, thankfully, and I'm very appreciative of this, you just organically join us because that is your habit. Others will see the headline and decide to say, oh, I wonder what this is about. Let's find out what's going on with the show. So every show, we always give our shows an episode number, but we also give them a headline too. And the headline for today's show reads as follows. Seattle's Super Bowl win provides rare moment for Kirby Smart. Now, would anyone in the class like to guess what the rare moment is as it relates to Kirby Smart? Perhaps you can play along at home. I think that today Kirby Smart is experiencing a feeling. Now, he probably doesn't care, so he's maybe not. But if he did ponder this, I think he'd be experiencing a feeling. He's having an experience that he's probably never had before and may not ever have again. For this particular moment, we would say that Kirby Smart is not the most talked about, the most famous Georgia grad in the coaching profession. That today, that actually belongs to Mike MacDonald. For now, as the reigning Super Bowl champion, obviously the Super Bowl, the most watched event in sports, if not all of entertainment. Today, Mike MacDonald is the most famous University of Georgia grad within the coaching profession, and at least for now, Kirby Smart would take a little bit of a backseat in terms of being buzzed about, being talked about. Probably a little less of that for Kirby right now, a little more of that for MacDonald. Now, of course, we know if Kirby Smart is slightly less famous today than MacDonald, Kirby's more than happy to give that fame over to him, and perhaps a little bit of anonymity would do Kirby he'd probably be pretty happy to have some of that. But for today, that is true. And I was thinking about that because obviously, MacDonald is not a guy that I feel like I know particularly well. We talked about this last week. I don't really remember him being at Georgia. I don't really, until he had already gotten famous as Michigan defense coordinator and candidate for NFL coaching jobs. Up until that point in time, I really didn't know who he was at all. And it's only to me sort of a triviality, a historic footnote. Oh, yeah, he also was a graduate assistant at Georgia and a guy that had got his start there at UGA. And this is something that he's readily talked about. In fact, if you want to go back to Super Bowl last week, the kickoff, when we actually did something about this on Friday, what the used to be called Media Day or Media Night, it's kind of turned into Super Bowl opening night. That's the way in which that's labeled now. And our colleague D. Orlando Ledbetter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, being at Super Bowl opening night, had a chance to ask the head coach of the now reigning Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks about humble days at the beginning of his coaching career, getting a chance to be a graduate assistant. Mark Richt, head coach at Georgia at the time. This is where it all began for Mike MacDonald. And at Super Bowl opening night, from our colleagues at the AJC, this is MacDonald on the subject of how the University of Georgia, a big part of his origin story now as a Super Bowl winning coach.
It took me about 2 years of knocking on the door, and shout out to Joe Tereshinski. Helped give me that opportunity, and Coach Rick took a chance on me. Didn't need to do it. I had no football. I was a high school football coach in the area. I had no connections, but gave me that chance, and felt like you kind of wanted to make him right by giving you those chances. So, but I love Coach Rick. When you talk about just people that you look up to, that walk the walk and talk the talk, it doesn't happen as often as you'd like. And he's definitely really the first person I saw. I was like, man, this guy, he's the real deal. And he backs up what he says. His players love him. He's about the right stuff. So love Coach Rick.
That's actually really cool. I think that's really awesome to hear a guy like MacDonald in the midst of the most important week of his life, as at least professionally speaking, take some time to give Rick the praise there. And we're going to zoom in and get a chance to see a little bit of him there at work. Our Cody Chafin's doing getting deep into it to give us an example of MacDonald there at work, which is a great thing to see at a Georgia practice. The point, though, is well, that's a good level of praise for Mark Richt during a Super Bowl open night to be a relevant figure in that discussion. I think that's really cool. And this is one of those things where, and I was thinking about this last night, we're a Georgia show. The Super Bowl winning coach is a Georgia grad. We got to talk about this. We got to have something to say about this, just because it's one of those things. It's just remarkable. You need to discuss it. And I think the way that I feel about this, because ultimately I'm not really quite so sure what it means, because MacDonald's time in Georgia was not all that. I was just not all that top of mind for me. I was not super aware of who he was when he was here, but I did grow up, like listening to the radio broadcast on the way to Georgia games. And you know how when they would, they talk about, a lot of times it'll be an academic related thing or, some sort of research breakthrough on the radio broadcast pregame show. They'd always say something along the lines of, and that's another Bulldog, point of pride. And they always said it like that, Bulldog, point of pride. And I guess this is what this is for me. I don't quite know what it means for Georgia that a Georgia grad is the Super Bowl coach, the Super Bowl winning coach, but it does feel like a Bulldog point of pride. It does feel like one of those things of, oh yeah, a UGA grad's now a Super Bowl winning coach. That's a pretty cool thing, and we're certainly happy for Mike MacDonald on that. I definitely was thinking a lot about coaches when I was watching this game last night, though, because, listen, I think that what you see both from the winner MacDonald and Mike Vrabel on the other side of the New England Patriots, very quick turnarounds for both these teams. New England, for instance, was in post-Bill Belichick era. They were in a horrible spot for a while. Probably made a bad coaching hire with Jared Mayo. That was a disaster. Then you bring in Vrabel, and boom, what is it? Year two, all of a sudden, man, completely resurrect, totally new look franchise after a long time with Tom Brady. Now you got Drake May, long time with Bill Belichick. Now you got Mike Vrabel. But all throughout the season, that's a team that was back to being dominant again and right back there in the Super Bowl again, something that organization has done over and over again. And you just see how transformational the right coach can be. I'd say you'd see the same thing with Mike MacDonald, too, who, going back to the clip we just heard, humble beginnings as a graduate assistant. But think about how fast he rises after that. He is a DC at Michigan. Then he's on the radar in the NFL. And now he's a head coach. And then boom, just like that, quick, year one hire, and boom, Seattle in the Super Bowl, winning the Lombardi Trophy. That's how quick all of that can happen. We also saw a version of that in college football this year. If you ask me, who was the most consequential figure in this year's college football playoff, it's not, to me, with all due respect, Fernando Mendoza, the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, because we have one of those every single year. To me, the most buzzed about, the most talked about figure in this year's college football playoff had to be Kirk Cignetti, the Indiana coach, because those of us who've been around college ball for a long time know that Indiana's arguably the worst program of all the major programs in our lifetime. And I think until November, they were essentially the losingest team in major college football history. And now they're the reigning national champion because of how transformational a figure Kirk Cignetti was as a coach. Last night's Super Bowl, another example of that. Transformational guy on the one side, Vrabel, losing to another transformational coach in Mike MacDonald. And I think that what that tells us is that we live in a day and age in which no matter how much attention gets paid, especially in college football now, because in college football, we have this new era upon us where all of a sudden we're paying players, and there's the NIL era, and it's a player compensation era. And there are some who I think, not nefariously necessarily, but just they assume that because now we're paying players, that players have become more important than coaches. But I would tell you, no, that's not the case. Look at the success that MacDonald and Vrabel have had. Look at the success that Curt Cignetti has had. That coaches, even in a day and age in college football where compensation for players is the most talked about subject, coaching isn't less important than it was. In fact, if you look at Cignetti, you can make a case it's just as important, if not more important, than it's ever been before, which is a really good thing if you are the team that we talk about here on this show, the Georgia Bulldogs. Because while I begin the show by jokingly saying that, Kirby Smart's not currently the most famous, most talked about Georgia grad in the coaching profession. I'm mostly joking when I say that. But as we move through the offseason, a lot of these rankings and lists come out and that sort of thing, Kirby Smart will still be ranked as the top coach in college football. Curt Cignetti seems to be a star on the rise, and some people will do topics around, hey, has Cignetti passed Kirby Smart as college football's top coach? And people are free to say what they want. Cignetti's obviously the reigning champion in the sport right now. But by and large, the consensus, even outside DawgNation, the consensus is that Kirby Smart is still the top coach in college football. And thankfully, this organization, Georgia football, doesn't quite need transforming like Indiana football did, or the Seattle Seahawks did, or the New England Patriots did. But it's still really good to have the top coach in the sport. And I do think, in a roundabout way, this upcoming year is a really important, really interesting, fertile ground for Kirby Smart to demonstrate just how good of a coach he really is. Because what Georgia's obviously leaned on, and I don't think this is a bad strategy necessarily, they've leaned on roster retention. They've leaned on the hard work they've done in recruiting, the deep and talented roster they have of keeping as many of those guys in the program as they possibly can. Georgia's plan for 2026, to sum it all up, is we want to be as Georgia as we can possibly be. We are going to double down on the Georgia-ness of our program and be more Georgia than we've ever been before by holding on to as many Georgia players as we possibly can. And we think that's a pretty good strategy. But it's also fair to point out that while Georgia is looking at 2026 to say, we want to be as much like ourselves as we can to replicate the kind of talent acquisition work that's worked for us in the past and the playing style that's been successful for us in the past, there are other programs that are getting really, really aggressive in the hopes of pushing Georgia off of its perch. And when you look to the West especially, there are some programs that are just spending really, really big. For instance, the team that's probably, I think, although I don't know for sure, probably spent the most money over the course of this offseason has probably been Texas. Texas did not make last year's college football playoff, and the sense that you get in Austin, whether you describe this as desperation or just determination, I'll let you determine one way or another what you think it is, either desperation or determination, Texas wants to be back in the college football playoff this year. And for a program that began last year as the preseason number one, they want to fulfill some of this hype that seems to exist around them. And we actually talked about this a little bit the other day. You may remember this, that our friends at CBS Sports have already put out their first power rating in the SEC for the 2026 season. And it's one of those things that if you're a Georgia fan, you probably just joke about this. You probably, and you deserve the chance to maybe laugh about this, because I do think it's a little bit funny, because here we have a situation, and we said we'd come back to it, today we are. Here you have a situation where, Georgia is the back-to-back SEC champion. Georgia, the team we just mentioned, Texas, has played them 3 times since Texas has come into the SEC. Georgia's won all 3, a trilogy of games in Austin, Atlanta this past year, and Athens. Georgia has really controlled Texas since the Longhorns have been in the SEC, but that never seems to stop the hype around Texas from being almost a runaway train. So much so that the first power rating for SEC teams in the 2026 season has not the back-to-back SEC champ at the top of it, Georgia. We told you this the other day. Georgia came in second in this CBS power rating. But Brandon Marcello, the writer of all this, actually had Texas at number 1. I want to read to you what Marcello says about Texas. He says, "We'll keep saying it until Texas actually wins the national title. But Steve Sarkisian has built yet another contender. Quarterback Arch Manning was excellent down the stretch last season, and adding 5-star receiver Cam Coleman alongside running backs Hollywood Smothers and Raleigh Brown gives Texas arguably the best offense in the SEC. Defense is loaded, with former Pittsburgh linebacker Rasheem Biles stepping in to lead Will Muschamp's. Oh, yeah, don't forget about that. Muschamp's over there now. Will Muschamp's unit. The Longhorns look poised to strike this fall." I think that's a really interesting snapshot because what Marcello writes, I think, is reflective of what a lot of people think. That we're going to go ahead and do the Texas hype thing all over again because this year it may be true. This year they may live up to it because if you spend big to keep Arch Manning, if you spend big to bring in Cam Coleman, and you spend big to bring in Will Muschamp, if you bring in a couple of running backs trying to fix an area which maybe you weren't great a year ago, if you do all of this, bring all this talent in, then finally maybe Texas can live up to the hype. And maybe they can just money whip everybody in the SEC. And let's face it, y'all, when you look at who won the 2024 national championship, Ohio State, after spending a lot of money, and what Michigan did in 2023 to hold on to a lot of the talent they'd had in the program, and Ole Miss, after getting blown out by Georgia in 2023, said, if we want to beat Georgia, we got to get talent like Georgia. And so therefore they get really aggressive on NIL and transfer portal. And to a certain extent that worked because they played deeper into the playoffs than Georgia did this year, including beating UGA in the Sugar Bowl. We can't deny that the strategy that Texas is trying to employ, we can't deny that that strategy might work. That they may just have spent so much money that really and truly they may actually finally live up to the hype because of how much money they've spent. However, we'll also notice this. To go back to last night's Super Bowl, Mike MacDonald, transformational figure. Whatever buttons he was pushing as a coach, those buttons just really seem to work. Curt Cignetti in this past year's college football playoff. We still don't fully know how he did it, but it's obvious that he did do it. He made Indiana into the very best team in college football. Now, Georgia's not in need of a transformation like that, but this would be a great year for Kirby Smart to once again demonstrate that he is the very best coach in college football. And a great way to do that, it's almost like Texas creates the perfect foil for Georgia. Because much like the comic book thing, there's an aspect of Texas that just feels like the counter opposite of Georgia. Georgia's built one way, Texas seems to be a sharp contrast. And there are elements of this that almost just bring out the best in Kirby. And if Georgia's moving into an SEC battle in 2026, where some teams like Texas are just going to try to overwhelm Georgia with the amount of money they spend and the hype around the program and the glitz and glamour that's required to keep up with those kinds of financial investments, well, that is a great chance for Georgia to show, led by Kirby Smart, our culture, our organizational structure, the stuff that makes Georgia, Georgia still comes shining through. In the same way transformational coaches lead to Super Bowl success and can lead to college football playoff success, the transformation that Georgia underwent years ago, it is just as strong as ever. And I can't help but think back to what happened for Georgia when it beat Texas for the first time as an SEC member in 2024. The game in Austin and all of the talk about fireworks around the game, literally and figuratively. There was so much of that. And there's an element of some of that celebrity stuff and just the natural ritziness that a program like Texas seems to put on display. That seemed to bring out a little extra competitive fire in Kirby Smart. And whatever he found in 2024, I think a lot of Georgia fans are open. Can you dig deep and pull that back out here in 2026? Let's go back in time, post-game on the field, to get a reminder of exactly how much that game seemed to mean to Kirby Smart.
Nobody believed us. And then they tried to rob us with calls in this place. And these guys are so resilient. You know what I mean? We talked about intent. What was our intent when we walked on the field? Our intent was not to take pictures, not to do all the superstar stuff. Our intent, our intent was to eat. Our intent was to come eat and be hungry. I'm not interested in all the bells and whistles. What I want is a team that fights their ass off, and they did tonight.
When you hear Kirby Smart saying that if you can catch him on the field, if you can put the microphone right in his face, which TV has the privilege of doing, you're going to get the raw, unfiltered stuff. And when you hear Kirby say that, you cannot tell me that game in 2024 didn't mean something to him. And the 2 wins that Georgia's gotten since then meant something to him too. You can't tell me it didn't because of how raw and real those emotions are. So let me see if I can sum all this up this way. That Georgia is facing another year in 2026 where a program like Texas is going to try to make it look easy. They're going to look around the landscape in the SEC and say, we can buy this thing. We can go out and pay for some players and bring in a roster, and we can take this from Georgia because, to their line of thought, Georgia can't spend what we can. So, therefore, we're going to step in with our finances, and we're just going to purchase the SEC. And Kirby Smart, in so many words, in the clip you just heard, is saying this thing is not for sale. Because ultimately the difference between winning and losing, we're talking about true championship team compared to a team that just looks good in the preseason rankings, the extra tenacity that success requires is not the kind of thing that you can just buy with money. You've got to earn it with blood, sweat, and tears, and Kirby Smart has talked about that thing so much. So look at this past year's college ball playoff with Curt Cignetti on top. Look at last night's Super Bowl with a first-year coach in MacDonald beating, a second-year coach in Mike Vrabel. How quickly both those coaches got their team back to Super Bowl level. You realize that this sport, football, at the Saturday level, the Sunday level, coaching is still, I believe, the most important part of it all. It's the spot where you see sometimes the greatest inequity. Some coaches are just better than others. They're smarter, they're bolder, they're whatever. They're just better. And better coaches lead to better results, better seasons. And in 2026, with a bunch of teams across this SEC that have tried to spend big in the transfer portal and bring in new talent as a way of nudging Georgia off the perch that it's been on, this is a chance for Kirby Smart to remind the world of just how good of a coach he really is and preventing all of that from happening. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Breda Pest Management, and we are glad you are with us today, no matter how you get to us. And I do hope you enjoyed game last night. It was our last one for a while. NFL playoffs have been great. This game last night I thought was pretty boring. But for the most part, it was still good to have some football in our lives, and we want to have a very long winter until the sport returns, hopefully before you know it, with some spring practice here coming up. But we still got plenty of football to talk about nonetheless, and our ability to do so today is made possible by our friends at Breda Pest Management. Bugs, critters, mosquitoes in your yard, flying squirrels in your attic, which, believe it or not, is a real thing. Whatever you might be dealing with or whatever you think about on the list of things you hope not to deal with, our friends at Breda Pest Management can prevent that for you. And I'll tell you this, the folks at Breda take care of my home and my wife, who mostly deals with that kind of thing because I'm a disorganized mess, she'll tell you. The phone calls she's had with Breda, always really professional. The care that our home gets, both inside and outside. You know, a lot of these, companies now, they're so, corporate-minded, things like that you don't see the great technician going inside the house like you would have seen before. But with Breda Pest Management, they're still doing that, right? They're not just getting rid of the bugs outside the house. They're coming inside to make sure your home truly is bug, critter-free, especially when it comes to mosquitoes. I should say termites, what I mean to say. When it comes to termites, listen, those wood-destroying organisms can impact what's perhaps the number one investment you have in your entire life. So you want people who go that extra mile for you. That's what Breda's all about. And even better, they can put money back in your pocket when you make the switch to them. So I want you to find them online. It's bredapest.com. BREDA, that's the website, bredapest.com, and make the switch to Breda Pest Management today. In business since 1975, that's multiple generations of the Breda family taking great care of customers, doing so so for you too. Got a brand new office in Gainesville, which is really fun. They've taken care of a lot of the University of Georgia athletic facilities for a long time, which is a really cool thing. That is what Breda Pest Management is all about. So make the switch today online, bredapest.com, for more on that today. BREDA, bredapest.com, for more on that today. All right, we got Jon Stinchcomb coming up. Great day to have the former Super Bowl champion on the show. We will get to that here coming up in a little bit. Prior to that, though, let's go around the dog house. And, of course, we're happy to have all of you with us here today for that. And, one of the questions I get sometimes is, how do you decide what to talk about in the show? How do you do this every day? How do you think of things to talk about? And I always jokingly tell people, listen, I'm just a robot. You can wind me up and I'll just talk and talk and talk and talk. Many of you are probably not too surprised to know that. But when it comes to topics on the show, one of the things that I usually pay attention to is if multiple people choose to share something with me, if this is the kind of thing that I'm seeing some chatter among some Georgia fans online regarding, then to me, especially this time of year when the entire world is sort of focused on the Super Bowl, and obviously we're still thinking Georgia football, if multiple people are passing this around, then I assume this might be the kind of thing that the larger audience, oftentimes not, as online as others are, that this is the kind of thing the larger audience might also be interested in too. Example of that, there is a graphic, and I guess the graphic was made by just some regular guy. It has since been, I think, there's all these accounts now, especially on Twitter, where they'll just basically take graphics and they'll share them and they'll do whatever. And there's a lot of, I don't know, there's a lot of, whether you want to call it borrowing or stealing, there's a lot of that exists on the internet here right now. Perhaps an example of this, multiple accounts have used this graphic. It's hard to even know where this originally started. I also haven't checked the math to see if it's correct, but it seems to be. Let me show this on the screen here for a moment. An interesting thing. So I got this from an account called Football's Greatest Moments. Some of you shared this with me. It's the most sacks in the NFL by players from certain colleges dating back to the year 2000. Now, this is a long time, right? It's a quarter century or more. But the most NFL sacks by college since 2000, according to this, Georgia is by far number one. Georgia has 1,024 sacks in the NFL by its former players since the year 2000. That's ahead of Ohio State at 715, Florida at 699, and on you go down the list. Florida State, USC, Purdue, weirdly is pretty high, Miami, Michigan, Alabama, Penn State. Excuse me. But it's Georgia by far and away at the top with 1,024. And listen, I think a lot of this speaks to, and by the way, if you're going back to the year 2000 in the NFL, then you're digging back into, like, say, the Jim Donnan era, right? We talked the other day about Richard Seymour. This is the Richard Seymour. This is the, I mean, you're digging deep into not just the Kirby Smart era. Frankly, there's probably less of the Kirby Smart era here than there is Rick and Donnan before that, and a lot of players from Georgia who've gone on to have very long, very productive NFL careers. And in some cases, there are guys who became maybe better at the NFL level than they were in college. There is some of that going on there too. But either way, we don't have any reason to believe these stats are incorrect. It just speaks to a lot of Georgia guys have gone to the NFL and produced a lot of pass rush. And I think the general theme of the people who shared this with me was something along the lines of, boy, it'd be nice to see Georgia awaken that pass rush for its team here for this upcoming season. This is the sort of thing that Davin Bellamy and I have talked a great deal about recently. Georgia's obviously thinking about that right now because it does have a coaching opening currently with its outside linebackers coach. Chidera Uzodiribe has moved on to the NFL. He's now with the Dallas Cowboys. Georgia seeks his replacement. Whoever steps into that role is going to have a lot of really, I think, impressive talent to work with. And what we're hoping is that Georgia can create a pass rush on the field in 2026 that at least is reminiscent of what we're told has happened for former Georgia players in the NFL, where they go to the league, they're getting after quarterbacks left and right in the Kirby Smart era. That has not been the kind of thing we've necessarily always seen on the field from the Dogs. And Kirby has openly acknowledged that when it comes to stats like this or some of the havoc rate stuff, which also includes turnovers, this is not the kind of thing that Georgia's, even though the defenses themselves mostly have been stellar, this is not the kind of thing that Georgia's typically done well with. In fact, here's an example from the recent past, Kirby Smart talking about that very thing.
We've been that way before. You know, we have never been a sack machine. If you look at it statistically, we've never been a turnover machine. We have been better defensively than we are right now, but a lot of that has to do with the culture of the league, what we're playing in, the parity. I'll take the strengths we have, work with them, try to work on the weaknesses, and worry about the process and not the results. That's what we're worried about right now.
Any good coach would obviously say what Kirby Smart said there. Process, how you go about something, is more valuable than results, which can be misleading. They can be flukish. I would put turnovers in that category. Obviously, it'd be great to have a bunch of takeaways, but if you look year over year, compare across time, that's a pretty erratic stat. You might be really good one year and not very good the next. Sometimes even within seasons, you may have a ton of takeaways the first half of the year, but that doesn't necessarily replicate itself in the second half of the year. For the most part, though, I would say pass rush a little bit different. For the most part, though, pass rush is just going to travel just a little bit more. And it's the kind of thing that I do think, just given the natural talent that exists on the Georgia roster, many guys who will one day play in the NFL and may go on to do, or a lot of these guys have been doing since the year 2000 apparently, which is finding a little bit more pass rush success on Sundays than they sometimes had on Saturdays, that Georgia actually has the chance to unlock that while they are in college. And I do know that fans would love to see it. Now, Kirby is obviously directionally accurate when he says you don't necessarily have to lead the world in sacks to have a great defense. Georgia's had great defenses in years when it necessarily hasn't had great sack totals. 2022 is probably an example of that. But boy, it sure does make it easier, doesn't it? When you're getting quarterback on the ground, because, I mean, think about the Sugar Bowl this past year. One time, getting Trinidad Chambliss on the ground, one of those, crazy, scramble moments he had, boy, that could have been the difference between winning and losing that game. Getting after Ty Simpson the way that Georgia did probably was a huge difference maker when it came to the SEC championship prior to that, back in December. That while you can win and be great on defense without necessarily having a great pass rush, boy, a great pass rush does seem to make it easier. And it seems like Georgia's got some talent that could produce a great pass rush. And if Georgia is going to stay on top in the SEC, play deeper in the college football playoff, unlocking that group's potential would just seem to be a pretty direct line towards making that happen, which is one of the reasons why UGA fans will remain curious about exactly who this new outside linebackers coach ends up being and how he fits into the larger story that's going on with the Georgia defense. That is worth watching. For now, we'll make that around the doghouse. And before I get Jon Stinchcomb here today, can I do this real quick, reminding you that you have a couple of days left, courtesy of our friends at Kroger, to register for your chance to win the Dog Nation Cruise. This comes up Utopia of the Seas, April 20th to the 24th. It's actually going to be nice weather today, believe it or not. And when the sun comes out after seemingly not having been out for what feels like months, it just gets me thinking about the spring. When I think about the spring, this is one of the things that I always think about. Our Dog Nation cruise on board Utopia of the Seas. You have no idea how just blessed I feel to be able to do something like this with so many Georgia fans each year, and how excited I am to do that with so many of you this year, and really blown away by the generosity of Kroger, who says, we want, maybe if you missed your chance to go, or this is just not a good year for you to buy that stateroom or whatever else, give you a chance to win your way onto Utopia of the Seas in April. I think that's amazing. So check out DawgNation.com/contest. That's DawgNation.com/contest, and you can register for your chance to win. It includes a gift card to help you get down to Port Canaveral, a hotel the night before the cruise there in Port Canaveral, then leaving out on Utopia of the Seas, stateroom for two on board the ship, trip to Nassau in the Bahamas, the wonderful private island, incredible experience, onboard credit to enjoy while you're on Utopia of the Seas. It's a great giveaway. So go to DawgNation.com/contest. You can find out more about the rules. Obviously, there are some of those. You can give us your information in the event that you're the winner. And then We'll also ask you, after 10 years of Kirby Smart at Georgia, your favorite memory of those 10 years. Just for fun, we'll ask that for you there as well. You can give us all of that online, DawgNation.com/contest. Courtesy of Kroger, you'll have your chance to win your way on the Dawg Nation cruise. Just a couple of days left, though. February 13th, I think, is the deadline to register for your chance to win. So just a couple of days left on that. Make sure you do that today. Would love to see you, courtesy of Kroger, on board the Dawg Nation cruise. All right. Before we are done today, we'll give credit to Georgia, who had some success in a sport outside of football this past weekend, but also a little bit of a wish list for me about what I would wish we could see a little bit more of. We'll give you that before we're done. But for now, on a post-Super Bowl day, nobody better to have on the show than our Super Bowl champion. It's Jon Stinchcomb here today. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to Jon Stinchcomb. We're always thrilled to have him as a part of our program. John, I did not find last night's Super Bowl to be a dazzling display of heart-stopping football action. The NFL playoffs, for the most part, this year really have been. A lot of these games have been outstanding. Last night's game wasn't. One of the things we have talked about, though, recently is that the explosion of offense that we saw, in the college game around the time that like Joe Burrow's at LSU and some of the stuff that Alabama had going on at the time and probably some of the stuff that Ohio State's doing, we're not quite in as explosive of an offensive era in college football right now. Maybe last night's Super Bowl is also a reminder that we're not quite really in that in the NFL necessarily either, that, defenses can have success. Last night, both defenses did. This game, for the most part, I think went the way a lot of folks thought it would go. Defense better than offense. And we are in that in football right now. I think a bit of a period in which the game that's always so cyclical has cycled back in the direction of defense and in some cases lower scoring games. Was that your takeaway based on what you saw last night?
I think that's a great analysis of where we're at. You look at it, and for the past few years, the RPO system had changed the game, and now we see that defenses have kind of caught up and even add challenges to the offense with the variability. I think you saw last night from both sides, from New England's defense and Seattle's, that when you have these hybrid players, the guys that can play, linebacker / safety, that can come and rush the passer and be as effective when they drop back in coverage, it allows a defense to kind of dictate what opportunities exist for the offense. And there was a time there when Seattle was running the ball effectively that you think, okay, this is going to create some different opportunities. And I think we saw a little bit of an adjustment from New England. And ultimately what you see is when you've got highly skilled coordinators that understand the game and can play the chess match that exists, when you've got the players that can execute defensively, now we're in that point in the cycle where offenses are trying to manufacture opportunities that the windows are just so small because I think the defenses have caught up.
A couple of things that I think about when it comes to both quarterbacks last night, and I'll start on the losing side with Drake May. I'm a little too young to really remember when Dan Marino was in the Super Bowl, but I always grew up with the story of here's Marino, part of that class of 83, this incredible, sensational young quarterback, gets the Super Bowl in year 2. Everybody thinks he's just going to own the AFC for many years to come. And it didn't happen. He never got back. Now, he went on to have a great career, but the story I always heard from people a little older than me was, Marino thought he was going to win every Super Bowl because he got there year 2, never got back again. And it reminds me a little bit of, it's slightly different, but still, I think somewhat similar. Kirby Smart gets to a national championship in year 2. And, John, that could have been it. Dan Marino, when he makes the Super Bowl in year 2, never got back again. When Georgia broke through, and here's this very young Kirby Smart who gets to a national championship game in year 2, a little bit like what Marino would have done and what Drake May did last night. We have no idea what the rest of his career is going to be. But sometimes the early success is not a foreshadowing of future success. And it is really cool to think what Georgia was able to build on after what it did in 2017, breaking through for that very first time, because we do have examples in football. We'll see what happens with Drake May. Dan Marino once was this, that just because you have the early success doesn't mean you have any guarantee of any future success. And I don't know, this game sometimes provides you a reminder of that, doesn't it?
I think it speaks to the greatness of the Belichick Patriots era of being able to get to that pinnacle and stay there. And what we've seen from Georgia is very similar. Coach Payton, when he came to New Orleans, first year goes to the NFC Championship, and that you weren't quite there yet as an organization. I think you've seen that a couple different ways, and you can go one of two directions. You can continue to build, and a couple years down the road, you're right back in that discussion, and your organization is ready for it, or it was a flash in the pan. Georgia is an example of how they continue to build under the Kirby Smart era, and the entire organization is better because of it. And you have back-to-back national champions and continue to be in the discussion on an annual basis. And on the flip side of that are teams like LSU, where they had one of the best rosters, and it was a flash in the pan. So you look at how teams are built and the directions that they can go. And for Drake May and the Patriots, I think Vrabel's a great coach, and I think they're probably way ahead of schedule of where they should be. But you have to continue to build, and the great coaches, the great organizations recognize that. They appreciate the early success. Obviously, so does the fan base, but the work isn't done. And you recognize, to be the contender at the end of the year, it takes special effort, especially to stay there and try to retain talent and build in the process, and still at the collegiate level, still recruit at a high level. And now with the changing landscape, the recipe might have changed a little bit for certain teams, but it certainly hasn't for Georgia, or so it seems.
A completely different point about the other quarterback in the game, Sam Darnold. For whatever reason, I've always been a little bit of a fan of Darnold. I liked him at USC. I remember, I guess it would have been 2016 season, that thrilling Rose Bowl game, USC Penn State. I don't know if you remember that or not, but that was, terrific game. Darnold, though, obviously had kind of a disaster with the Jets. A lot of people have had a disaster there. I think Seattle represents his fifth team, I think. He's still only 29, so not necessarily, 100 years old necessarily. But an example of relatively late in his career, after several stops didn't quite go his way, now he's a Super Bowl champion. It's not the main reason they wanted it to win the MVP last night, but he has proven himself, Seattle this past year, Minnesota the year before that. He's proven himself to be a capable quarterback after a lot of folks had really written him off, and maybe at the time written him off with what they thought was good reason. But it is an example of something that those of us who are Georgia fans, I hope we keep in mind, even for the lifespan of a Georgia player that may be 4 years or in some cases less than that, is be careful not giving up too quick. Be careful not trying to write a story about a guy too quickly, because oftentimes that ends up just being really wrong. And I'm not telling you that Darnold is the best quarterback in the NFL, or he's even among the best quarterbacks in the NFL, but he is a Super Bowl champion. He's certainly proven himself to be a capable starter now in back-to-back years. And that's not what people thought he was even a year or two prior to that. That I do think, because of the nature of what I do for a living, people give opinions, and it's fun to give the loudest possible opinion. That does lead us to give up on guys pretty quick. And there are examples here around Georgia of so-and-so's never going to be good, so-and-so's a bust, so-and-so's whatever. But oftentimes, a little bit of patience actually ends up being rewarded. And I probably need to tell myself this as much as anything. Just be really careful about giving up on a guy too soon, because in the case of Sam Darnold, he's made a lot of those opinions look pretty foolish now, has he not?
Yeah, players develop, and that's what gets lost. Is you can't take a singular snapshot, especially for a young player, whether it's in the college ranks or once they get to the NFL. It's not a finished body of work. I've scrolled through Twitter this morning and saw post after post about Will Campbell, and the guy had a rough game. He gave up a ton of pressures and all these things, and you hope for him that he recognizes there's so much more career in front of him, that his best games are still in front of him. But yet, as a fan, you don't really care. And sometimes that critique lands harder than it probably should. For Sam Darnold, he came out in the same class as Josh Rosen, and both had rough starts, and one was able to battle through and continue to get better. And you see where his career is now, similar to like a Baker Mayfield, who, when he first got there, it was like, oh, this guy's a bust, and plays really good football. So, what's hard in today's era is the critiques are so loud and so prevalent from so many different places, and everyone has an opinion. And never do we recognize or give a guy a benefit of the doubt that he can get better. And you see it in recruiting. I think you see it in the analysis of college football right now. Is even Coach Smart saying it. You have to be able to come and contribute early, as these high school players are competing against the transfer portal and guys that are fourth and fifth year into competing at a collegiate level. That is a huge challenge, and it's I think to the detriment of the players today, that many don't get the opportunity to develop. And if Sam Darnold had believed what everyone was saying when he was a New York Jet, then he wouldn't have had the experience that he had in Minnesota, and certainly wouldn't be hoisting a Lombardi trophy as a Seahawk. So the landscape has changed considerably. I don't think you get these single school, single program, single NFL team opportunities that guys used to have to kind of develop in-house and then contribute down the road. Now it's go be a part of a feeder system, and if you can matriculate yourself to the top, then great, we'll find you then. But it's a real challenge for these players, I think, mentally, if nothing else, to kind of block out the noise and recognize that it's an ongoing process of getting better, especially in college. But we've seen time and time again this happen in the pros, where I don't know if the development has changed or the systems have allowed for players to kind of just accentuate their strengths. And when you get to the point where you have to be a little bit more well-rounded, there's some real challenges, and then you have to continue to grow through them. But Darnold is a great example of blocking out some of that early noise and recognizing that a player can get better through the process.
I think that's really interesting. I want to finish in a moment with a question that's a little bit more normal, what I would typically ask you. But before that, though, one more thing on the Super Bowl that's a little bit more abstract, maybe. I was reading this morning something I also feel like I noticed last night, which is fairly subdued celebration on the part of the Seahawks. And I tell you what brought this to mind for me is, I don't know if you're aware of this at all, but this was a really big deal this past summer when the Oklahoma City Thunder won the NBA title, where a lot of people made a big deal about the fact that the Thunder just didn't celebrate at all. And I'm not saying it needs to be a wild party, and it's probably good not to be, binge drinking or something like that, I guess, in the locker room. But there was a lot of talk of, like the champagne didn't get really touched and some of this kind of stuff. Like the Thunder just didn't really celebrate. A lot was made of that at the time. And last night there was a little bit of chatter along the lines of, Seattle just expected to win, so therefore it was a more subdued celebration. I'm curious here of two things. A, what was the locker room celebration like when y'all won it with the New Orleans Saints? And B, what do you make of this age that we're in now, where it doesn't seem like, and there's a pretty wide age range of players on the Seahawks, maybe a little bit more so than the mostly very young Oklahoma City Thunder. But what do you make of a generation of athletes much younger than you and I are that don't seem to celebrate the way I've watched celebrations for most of my life? What do you think's going on here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sure they celebrated. I know. Speaking from experience, not always does the initial camera in the locker room capture all that goes on.
Fair enough.
Especially hours and hours after. When we won the Super Bowl in Miami, the locker room was a great scene, but the party, if you will, was with all of our family and friends that had come to the game back at the hotel. We had a Kenny Chesney's on stage in concert and singing and had great food. And,
hold on, can I stop for a second?
The celebration went hours.
I got to call time out for a second. So you telling me post game of the Super Bowl, you had Kenny Chesney on stage that night?
Oh yeah, it was on stage acting like we could sing with him. So Harry Connick sitting at our table with my family and us, and so to think that I'm grateful for the insight and the behind the scenes view that we get now as fans into the locker room, but I don't think we slept that night. You can watch interviews of Coach Payton and Drew that following morning and going, that guy got 20 seconds of sleep. Certainly not just what you see in the locker room. So I'm sure Seattle had a very similar experience where there was a plan in place for them to celebrate in a more intimate fashion with just their team, their family, and friends in a private occasion. So I'm not saying that things haven't changed in how teams celebrate and how this next generation celebrates, but I don't think we get the full picture if we're thinking that the immediate 15 minutes in the locker room captures all of the joy and celebrating that's occurred from the past 12 hours since they've won it.
So now I'm hung up on this. I got to know. So heaven forbid, what if you all lost the game? Do you just tell Kenny Chesney to go home? Does he still play a show? Does he just play sad songs? Like, what happens if you've got Kenny Chesney booked for the Super Bowl party? What happens if you don't win?
Well, you have to ask someone with a higher pay grade than I did, or clearance, because I don't know. I certainly wouldn't have gone to anything after the game. I think it was, an if-then relationship. If we win, then we're going to need you to help us celebrate. He was willing to do so.
That is an incredible story. We'll actually leave it for today. That's a great story. I appreciate that. John, always fun to pick your brain about stuff like this, and great to hear those stories about very interesting times in the past. Obviously, a pretty exclusive club, those that get a chance to put their fingerprints on the Lombardi Trophy and that Super Bowl ring to go along with it. We're thankful to get those stories from you and others each week here on our show. So thank you so much for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to our chance talking to you again soon.
Appreciate the time, BA. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs indeed.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So I never knew that. You just have Kenny Chesney booked for the post-game show. I hate to bring up, I really do. I don't do this flippantly at all. But for a lot of our audience, Falcons fans, you'll remember when the Falcons are up 28-3 in a Super Bowl some years ago. And you got to imagine, they're getting ready for the party. Whatever their version was of the Super Bowl party, whatever big thing they had planned, they're getting ready for it. Like the champagne's on ice, the ballroom is getting, that just makes my stomach hurt to think about, to have that just yanked from you. But yeah, Super Bowl party, Kenny Chesney playing postgame. And it does make me wonder, like, what does happen if you don't win? You just give Kenny his, because I'm guessing he gets his check no matter what. Does he just get his check and go home? That is a wild story. Very interesting stuff from our Jon Stinchcomb there on that. And certainly congratulations to all the celebrating that did take place. Let me also give a shout out here to our friends at Dr. Pepper for a moment. Obviously, when I'm celebrating post-game, I'm celebrating with the rich, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. You know I love that. And frankly, last night, watching the Super Bowl, I had a little bit of Dr. Pepper going last night, a little bit too. It was delicious. And any event you have going on, Dr. Pepper is always going to taste great with that. That's one of the reasons why we love shouting out Dr. Pepper here on the show. Big part of what we do all year long. And we would encourage you that as you're getting ready for a lot of fun stuff in the weeks to come, as you're shopping at your local Kroger, wherever you're picking up your groceries, pick up that delicious Dr. Pepper because it's a Pepper thing around here on DawgNation Daily. We love them, and we're happy to have them, and so make sure you check out some Dr. Pepper today. All right, let's go SEC through here just for a moment. First of all, congratulations in order. Georgia basketball got a much-needed win at LSU on Saturday. Had to have this one. Down early, came back, got the win, setting up a big one on Wednesday for Georgia against Florida in Stegeman Coliseum. Obviously, Georgia got the home win against Florida a year ago. They need this rivalry game. It'd be huge for Georgia. Thankfully, snapping the losing skid at the Maravich Center on Saturday. And as I watched college basketball this weekend, or at least paid some attention to it, I'm reminded of, boy, this league at times can be really fun, and it would be great to see Georgia, I think, more a part of this. For instance, we had a renewal of the rivalry between Alabama and Auburn, and the Auburn fans are getting all over Charles Bediako. You know who that is by now. This is the former pro that Alabama has done whatever it could do to get him back eligible in college basketball. Auburn fans are getting on him. I guess there's also a former Auburn player that now plays for Alabama, and so the student section is just all over these guys, so much so that Nate Oates, the Alabama coach, his post-game press conference essentially clapped back on that. I guess now the former Auburn player has because I only loosely follow some of this. The former Auburn player has now beaten his former team, I guess, twice now, and so he's talking about having a pretty good record against them, and basically, kind of participating in the little back and forth between Alabama and Auburn. And as an outsider to this rivalry, the one thing you see when you look in on this, whether it's games in Coleman Coliseum or the nice, relatively new facility that Auburn has, these Auburn Alabama fans, they take this rivalry in basketball pretty seriously. Now, both schools have essentially been relegated as being basketball schools now because it's been such a long time since they've had any national championship football success. They have to, basketball's essentially their last refuge. But nonetheless, they do take it seriously. They're into the basketball there. There is a rivalry that exists between those two teams in basketball. And you see some of this with other SEC teams too, where this is not something they're just doing to pass the time between now and the return of football season, but it actually does matter to them. This league, as it's gotten better across the board in basketball, and by the way, Georgia's been a part of that ascension, there are basketball rivalries that now feel like they have some real juice to them. So my point here is that as Georgia has dipped its toe in the water of basketball relevance, when you see the way in which Alabama and Auburn are sniping back and forth at each other, the stuff between, say, North Carolina and Duke this weekend, with the storming of the court and the unconfirmed, I'll just say it that way, reports of Duke coaches being punched by North Carolina fans, you realize that these basketball rivalries actually have a little juice to them. And so if Georgia could be just a little bit more relevant, a game against an obvious, natural, traditional rival like Florida on Wednesday, man, that thing could really feel like something. Georgia's got to be – they are way better than they used to be, but they got to be just a little bit better. And all of a sudden, some of the stuff that Bama and Auburn have with each other, Georgia could have some of that same kind of stuff too. And it wouldn't be one of those things where somebody like me, I do a show every single day. I really would, even though it's not really what the audience has said it wants, I would love to have a permission structure in place where we could very easily talk about basketball. And if the opposing coach, if the Florida coach, was it Todd Golden, if Golden is snapping back at Georgia the way that Nate Oates did with Auburn, look, that's a topic, y'all. That's a conversation. That is some much needed relevance for Georgia basketball. And I get the sense there's actually a growing number of Georgia fans that would like that. They are seeing some of the stuff happening in the SEC, and they're saying it'd be great to have a little more of that too. Now, Georgia, to its credit, was in the tournament last year. Most prognostications, I think, also have them remaining in the field here this year. So clearly there's a level of relevance for Georgia basketball right now that it didn't have as recently as a couple of years ago. But there's also a next level to this too, where the regular season games matter and there's some emotion at stake in the games because you feel like you know your opponent dislikes you. Some of the stuff we've had in football, you can have that in basketball. Bama and Auburn have that back and forth with each other right now. There are other SEC teams, Kentucky, Tennessee, I'd say, is an example of this. There is some meaningful rivalries within the SEC It'd be nice to have Georgia to have some of that. I think fans want it. If this program can just win just a little bit more, maybe UGA's on its way to getting some of that too. Stepping outside the SEC for a moment, I saw where North Dakota State University, longtime FCS power, is now moving up. And it's amazing how when people want something to happen fast, they can make it happen fast. And by the way, credit to our great team of folks putting the show together today. If you're watching on video, perhaps the first time a North Dakota State University logo, the bison, perhaps the first time it's appeared here on our screen over my shoulder, but there it is. North Dakota State University stepping up quickly to join the Mountain West for next season. Now, I presume, much like we've seen with some other programs, James Madison, I guess, among the most recent, they'll still have to play with like provisional status for a couple of years. I think that's the way the rules still work there. But if you care about some of the analytic stuff, not necessarily like ESPN FPI, but some of the ones that are a little even nerdier than that. For instance, I think Jeff Sagarin rates all college teams, not just the FBS, but all college teams, FCS included. And there are certain years where if you look at one of these mathematical rating formulas that includes FCS and FBS together, North Dakota State's one of the 25 best teams in the country. They really are. That they may be FCS, but there are just mountains of FBS teams that couldn't come close to beating North Dakota State, including some, upper tier Power 4 teams that are just not as good in a given year as North Dakota State is. So from a football quality standpoint, North Dakota State's been FBS level for a long time. There's a chance, sight unseen, even provisionally, they may be the best team in the Mountain West next year. I mean, they are a good football team year in and year out. Here's the question I would ask myself. Even though it's feasibly possible when eligible, which is probably a couple of years from now, North Dakota State could make the college football playoff. They absolutely could. Is that better than being – if you watch these FCS games, especially the FCS playoff, you watch the Brawl of the Wild, the great rivalry between Montana and Montana State. Stadium is packed for that. They played in the playoff this year. The tickets were like – the FCS playoff. The tickets were like – the get-in price was $500. It's crazy. The Dakota schools are all good. North Dakota State's been good for a long time, but now North Dakota, South Dakota State, all those Dakota schools, they're all good at FCS, and they have huge followings. People come to the games. It really matters in this, what I think of as big sky part of the country where you have like a lot of expansive land and kind of stuff you'd see in a Taylor Sheridan TV show. Like in that whole part of the world, FCS football is a really big deal. And now you're going to trade it to be just another FBS team. Like if I was doing Bison Nation Daily, would I think this is a good idea? Because a group of 5 team or group of 6 now is going to make the playoff, and even as the playoff expands, there's going to be space for a group of 5, a group of 6 team to be in there. And North Dakota State will eventually probably be one of the teams that does it. And maybe they see a world in which, well, if Indiana can become great, maybe we could too, and maybe they will. But man, I don't know. If you look at the bottom part of the FBS, the group of 5 level, are those fans and those teams having more fun than the top part of the FCS? I don't know. I really don't. I'm a long way away from North Dakota, but when I found out that North Dakota State was doing this, I was a little disappointed. I don't know. I think FCS football is pretty cool, and I think that North Dakota State's had a good thing going on. So maybe this will work out. But I have to admit, I was a little disappointed when I first saw this. Speaking of things that make me disappointed, I'm telling you right now, of all the things that we talk about of, trouble for college athletics and whatever else, this is the sort of thing that I worry about the most. We got another athletic department who's acknowledging massive debt. This time it's Penn State. That these programs, we've heard about Rutgers, we've heard about Cal, we've heard big story last week about Florida State, now Penn State in the midst on this. They are operating with just massive deficits year after year after year in terms of the budget. Now, I'm not naive. I understand this. My wife is a CPA. That you can play games with your budgets, and you can play games with your accounting. And given the fact that college programs are not for-profit entities, there's not a whole lot of incentive to show profit. That you can do an accounting game to make it seem like you're deep in the red, because that's perhaps to your benefit for all kinds of reasons. I realize you can make the book say what you want them to say, at least for the most part, without getting in anything unscrupulous or anything like that. That's just the way that goes. But we have reason to believe, even if the numbers can be played with somewhat, that there are a lot of programs going deep into deficits in order to keep the lights on. And I'm telling you, man, I don't know what that means for the future here, because this is the sort of thing that's going to eventually invite someone into your life that you can't necessarily easily get back out. That part of the reason we're hearing so much about private equity and, these entities like that coming into college athletics is because some of these programs just desperately need the money. They have tried to keep up appearances, and they're trying to, fund a football team while also allowing the football revenue to pay for every other sport in the world. And at a certain point, that's just not working anymore. And as I've said over and over again, this is the kind of thing that I'm very much against. I can make peace with a lot of things, but when you allow this to swoop into college athletics, you are running the risk of changing it greatly from what it's been before. College football is obviously a business, and I have no problem with that. I'm not anti-business. I don't have a problem with college football being a business, but there's a difference between a business and a corporation. A business sometimes has stakeholders. A corporation has shareholders. And listen, I'm not necessarily against corporations either. They are, important for your investment, your retirement account, things like that. We need corporations probably too, but serving your stakeholders and serving your shareholders are two very different ideas for the most part. And, increasing shareholder value as the prevailing mindset in college athletics, it will make it into a new thing, different from what it's been before. I'm not afraid of business within college football, but I would be pretty nervous about corporations and the corporate mindset that would come with that. But if these programs get into such debt that the only thing that can save them is the private equity fund coming in and saying, boom, here's this 9-figure or maybe $1 billion plus sum of money. The only thing that we ask in exchange for that is a chance to tell you what to do for as long as we're involved in your life. Boy, you run the risk of this feeling very, very different here very quickly. And the SEC should be mindful of this. Now, I have no idea what the overall books look like for the SEC. I don't have every reason to think that Georgia's in any kind of dire straits. But so far, we're hearing mostly about non-SEC teams in terms of huge sums of debt. As we continue to say, it'd be great if the SEC really would consider breaking away from the others. If the SEC has better overall finances, if the P&L looks a little better for the SEC than it does for the rest of college athletics, that might be another thing to consider here. Because once you get these investors in your life, it's not easy to get them out. And some of these programs may find out, or the sport overall may find out, that once you have new bosses, and borrower is slave to the lender, once you have new bosses, all of a sudden the direction of the sport starts to move in a different direction than it once did. It's just something to keep in mind here. A lot of debt apparently across college athletics. And I don't know, that I think creates a tricky scenario for the future. For now, we'll make that your SEC through. And before we get ready to say goodbye to you today, let me also give you a shout out to our friends at Zagoria Law, Zagoria. That's how you spell it. Here's what they do. If you or someone you love has been injured by a dog, maybe bitten by a dog, not yours, negligence on the part of the owner, and let's face it, there's almost always negligence on the part of the owner in these types of situations. Well, we think for you, that's no different than any other personal injury situation. You deserve your chance at compensation for pain and suffering, for medical bills, for whatever might be the unfortunate consequence based on what happened. Wasn't your fault, whoever's fault it was, well, maybe you ought to have your day in court against them. But if this is the kind of thing that you are contemplating, we would say make sure you work with somebody that really understands how these types of things are impacted by personal injury law and how this fits into the larger personal injury law space. There's all kinds of elements to that. You want to trust a specialist here, which is what our friends at Zagoria Law are. They literally wrote the book on how to win these kinds of cases. So give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's dog spelled conventionally D-O-G. 833-GA-DOG-BITE or online, ZagoriaLaw.com. They are who Dog Nation would trust in the event we found ourselves in a tough set of circumstances, bitten or injured by a dog. Zagoria Law is who we would trust. We encourage you to do the same. All right, as we get ready to say goodbye today, a lot of talk today about Mike MacDonald, Super Bowl champion. Another Georgia tie for the Seahawks there as well. Although, I think I have this right, not active. I think he's been dealing with injury. That's the running back Kenny McIntosh. No less, though, Georgia on its social media giving a shout-out to McIntosh, saying a national champion, now a Super Bowl champion. Congratulations to Kenny McIntosh. That is a cool thing. You can play football for a long time and not win anything. To have a chance to win both a college football and pro football championship, that puts you in a pretty special category. And you talk to Jon Stinchcomb, you can even hear him talk about how much that still means to him all these years later. Maybe one of these days we'll have Kenny McIntosh on the show and we'll ask him, hey, John said he had Kenny Chesney for his Super Bowl party. What did y'all have for a Super Bowl party? Now I'm curious to know. I got to learn more about this. Maybe one of these days Kenny McIntosh can tell us. Lousy, stinking Gators. We know we won't be asking them about any kind of victory celebrations because they don't have any, because they haven't won anything in a very long time. About 1,920 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. Back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time, do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust them here today. I am being told, apparently we had some chat issues there on DawgNation.com. I apologize for that. It is working now. But apparently we had a little bit of an issue during the show here today. I am sorry about that. For whatever reason, that is, I won't bore you with the details, but when we put the show together, and this has always been a problem, that every chat video platform essentially lives in one space. DawgNation.com has always lived in a completely different space, which creates a little bit of consternation from time to time. All right. But I will start on Dawg. I will start there today, though. Just to make up for what was a problem earlier. Yeah, so people are commenting now after missing it earlier. Jeremy Smith, UGA Marines in there. I'll give them more time to populate that with some questions if they want to. I'm going off my phone completely today for reasons I won't bore you with. We'll also check in over here at Facebook today, too. Oftentimes, Facebook feels like they get the short shrift. But today, I'll actually go to Facebook a little early and find out how people are, what they're thinking about over there. So we'll get some Facebook comments and we'll find out how people are doing over here, too. Jan Armisted's checking out. Jan, thanks for being here as always. Steve Annunziata says the number one Georgia Bulldog. We got a lot of folks in this chat that could qualify for that. Philip Wells giving a throwback to Curtis Blow, I believe it is, with the basketball rap. Oh, let's see what else. Somebody said that I think it's maybe Johnny, who is this? Yeah, Johnny Prescott says, I don't understand the fascination with the NFL. College football is a far superior game. Thought last night's game was boring. Turn it off shortly after halftime. Please stop trying to turn college football into the garbage we saw last night. Yeah, here's the way I think about this. So follow me just for 1 second. So growing up, I was a huge wrestling fan. Many of you know this. And I promise I'm going somewhere with this, so just give me a second to get there. Huge wrestling fan. But as I've gotten older, wrestling doesn't always hold my attention the way that it once did. And you might say, well, you're just more mature now. You've grown out of it. Honestly, I'm not quite so sure that's the case. Because I still everybody's phone has algorithm, and the algorithm shows you exactly, what it thinks you want to see. Like my phone's constantly showing me old wrestling clips from when I was a kid, and somehow I end up watching all of them. So pretty clearly my phone knows me, and pretty clearly I don't dislike pro wrestling, because all these old clips from when I was a kid, I still watch them as much as I ever did. but I don't watch as much current wrestling. I still watch some. We're in WrestleMania season now. I'll try to pay more attention, but I don't watch it the way that I used to. And if I had to ask myself, why is it that you don't watch as much wrestling? This is the one thing that I think that wrestling got wrong that made me feel disconnected from it as an entertainment mechanism. The wins and losses just don't matter anymore. And yes, I know it's predetermined. I know that. But I'm talking about within the storyline itself, so-and-so may win one night, may lose the next night, and then flip-flop again. I think you've gotten to a point, especially in the WWE, where the wins and losses just don't matter anymore. And therefore, if somebody gets beat, it doesn't mean anything to me. But when I was a kid, if the top guy got pinned, that's a huge deal. It was a huge deal. Now, some of that's probably more so because I was a kid, but still, I feel like the old school wrestling days, they did a good job of making the wins and losses feel like they meant something. And now it just doesn't. So I don't feel a ton of pressure to watch because whoever wins, whoever loses, it just doesn't really make me feel one way or another. The matches can be entertaining, but the actual outcome doesn't stir me emotionally. Now, this is exactly how I feel about college football compared to the NFL. Obviously, my entire life is organized around Georgia football, so of course I feel great emotion around that. But honestly, watching like, say, Miami and Indiana, I feel like I had a lot on the line emotionally with that game. And it's not just because Carson Beck, our former quarterback, was at Miami. It's about more than that for me. I mean, I've been with college football my whole life. I know how not good Indiana has been. I know how not good, from a championship standpoint, Miami has been, compared to their previous era the last couple of years. I'm not a Miami fan. I'm not an Indiana fan. But whoever won that game, it was going to mean something to me because I'm just emotionally invested in college football. Weirdly so, but still, I have what I think of is a fairly deep emotional investment in college football, even in games in which it's not my favorite team playing. In the NFL, I don't have any of that. I did find myself getting pretty bored several times last night because I didn't care who won. I really didn't. I just don't care. And most NFL games are like that for me, where I can drift in, I can drift out. I don't have any emotion connected to who is going to win. I can be fascinated by the games, and it is a typically speaking, a crisply played game. It is a much sharper brand of football than the football that we mostly enjoy, but it just doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't stir my soul very much. So I am just a college football guy. I watch the NFL through the lens of college football. Players I remember from college or prevailing trends on Sundays that I think have some relevance for Saturdays. I definitely, even when I watch pro football, I do so while thinking about college football and frankly wishing I was watching college football. The one thing the NFL always has going for, the reason why, to go back to Johnny's thought, the fascination with the NFL. Look, the NFL, even when it was not the most popular pro sport, and in my dad's generation, it wouldn't have been the most popular pro sport, but even when it wasn't the most popular pro sport, it was planting the seeds for what would become that. And look, you can't discount the fact that the NFL shows up on over-the-air broadcast TV at the same time on the most advantageous day. Like anybody who does like TV research will tell you that Sunday is the day that people just have less going on. That's the one day. And look, I realize that, what Sunday has meant in the country has changed over time. I'm not really talking about that right now. I'm just talking about the fact that, that Sunday is the day that if you want to capture the audience, it's the best day to do it because it is typically speaking the day which more people have more free time compared to any other day. And so since before almost any of us were alive, since almost before your dad was alive, 1 p.m., 4 p.m., the NFL on Sundays owned that over-the-air broadcast TV back when there was 4 channels. The NFL was on 2 of them. And even when baseball was more popular than football, they were planting the seeds for what they enjoy today, which is a thing where everybody has had NFL football on Sundays on for their entire life. And it's not a secret that they now dominate to the point where like 99 of the top 100 television events in a given year are going to be NFL games. They just dominate because they've always owned television. I do think as we move more and more into streaming, I think it'll be interesting to see how that changes. If at all. It may not change at all. It may go up. But the NFL has essentially solved TV. TV meaning a channel that you turn to as opposed to a streamer that you click into. Old school TV, the NFL and football in general has just dominated that. Bill Sanders says the NFL is much more corporatized. I feel that it is. I really do. And I'll tell you, and some of y'all know, I'm entertained by, like, say, point spreads and making predictions and things like that. I'm entertained by that. I think subtly, it's really interesting how much of last night's game broadcast. And y'all, I think that Mike Tirico is a terrific play-by-play man. I think he's amazing. But it's amazing how much of this game last night was only the gambling. I'll give you a couple of for instances. They tease the coin toss. You know what tease is? A tease is you're going to break, and when we come back, the coin toss. We know what they're doing. The coin toss is among the most bet things for the Super Bowl, almost as much as the actual game outcome. People love betting the coin toss. So they're making a big deal out of the coin toss, serving the gambling audience, which is not necessarily a bad thing, and they have a right to do whatever they feel like is going to generate the most audience. But throughout the game, you see the same type of thing taking place, getting very specific with some of the statistical conversation because, you know, a lot of the action, you know, it'd be interesting to see what the overall percentage is based on these, you know, individual player performances. And at one point in time, Tirico makes this big deal about correcting the sack total. And we know what this is. I mean, we know what this is. In a game that's pretty boring. The only thing they had to offer in a game that for a long time had no touchdowns was some of the individual player prop stuff and who was doing what. And they leaned heavily into that. And then at the end, once again, I'm not like moralizing here. I'm just pointing out what happened. Prior to the Gatorade, and this is like the one bet I would never make because I'm colorblind. But before the Gatorade or the sports drink got poured on Mike MacDonald's head, they got that camera right down in that, what do you call it, cooler or jug, whatever. And they show it being mixed up. And to my eyes, it looked yellow. I don't know what actual color it was. Like I said, I'm colorblind, but it appeared yellow. But once again, when you're sticking that camera right down into the Gatorade, we know what they're doing because so many people like betting on the Gatorade color. It is very interesting how much of that game last night. Now, if it's a more thrilling game, maybe a little bit different, or if it's a game that involves more of a recognized superstar such as a Tom Brady or somebody like that, maybe it would have been a little bit different too. But, you know, last night's game, I felt like the presentation on TV was more geared towards gambling than I've ever seen ever before. Maybe that's not a bad thing. I'm just pointing out it was just a thing that I couldn't help but notice. And I want y'all to watch. You talk about, you know, a true pro. I mean, listen. The one thing that hopefully we do pretty well around here is we all know what the most talked about thing was last night. But do you notice how, like, smoothly I'm just navigating around that? I mean, just complete. I mean, the discussion around the halftime dwarfed the game itself. I don't care what your brand of music is. It's probably not great for football that if you go on your phone during the game, that's all anybody's talking about before and after. And listen, like I said, you can like whatever music you like. It's honestly, when I say I don't care, I mean I literally do not care. I literally don't care. but probably not great for the league that this was the dominant conversation. And I do believe it was. Way more talk about who was or wasn't watching and who was or wasn't performing. The halftime stuff, way more conversation about that than the game itself. Probably not great for the league. Jonathan Aaron says, since your wife is a CPA, is that how you cook the books to hide all that Jimbo money? Yeah, perhaps that is the case. My wife is still active as a CPA. She has not worked in that field for quite some time. When our kids, it's one of those things where like when we had kids and you realize, boy, kids take up a lot of time. We made some pretty big decisions in our family at the time, and she stepped away from what had been a great career for her because we just felt like that's what our family needed. She's still active. Like she still does all of her, you call it, is it CPE when you have to like do your classes to hold on to your designation, whatever. So she still does all the classes, but she hasn't worked as a CPA in a good number of years now. So Jerry Dog Fan reports that maybe Sean Payton and Kenny Chesney may have been friends. Maybe that was why he was. Could be the case. That could be the case. Could be the case that Kenny Chesney and Payton were friends, and maybe that's why he was there. I have also heard. I want to say the Patriots may have had some of this kind of stuff over the years.
Yeah, I've heard from people there is always two parties, and the winning team has their party plan and the losing team has their party plan. And I've heard from people that Falcons one you mentioned, boy, it was miserable in Houston that night.
Had to have been.
You
Cody.
paid for it, and you can't just tell whoever is going to perform. All the money's spent, and so yeah, I think a lot of people bailed on that one and didn't go, and it's just sad drinking at that point.
The closest I have any kind of personal encounter with this is, and some of our audience will remember this, Cody, this predates your time at DawgNation. So when we did our post-game show from Hard Rock Stadium after Georgia beat Michigan in the Orange Bowl, which would have been January of 2022 in the conclusion of the 2021 season, I had never been to a Georgia game like this because Georgia fans have a big reputation for traveling. There were at least two Michigan fans for every one Georgia fan in that particular game. Michigan fans were everywhere. Had not played a notable game in decades. It's obviously 4 degrees in the winter in Michigan, so every Michigander was looking to get down south for that particular game. And Cody, Michigan fans were everywhere. And they thought they were going to win. Georgia had gotten beaten the previous game. Michigan thought it was going to win. Cody, when I tell you that a Michigan, and like I said, some of our audience will remember this because we did the post-game show with this going on.
Yeah, they had their New Year's Eve celebration on the field.
Okay,
right?
Yeah, so you were at the game but working for a different employer. On the field, big Michigan alumni group has a New Year's Eve party, and like there's this DJ, just like cutting it loose for 4 people because honestly, when they got beat, they got run out of the stadium, and the Michigan fans were no longer interested in their New Year's Eve party. And like how much do you think it cost to get a party on the field? Because that's what they got. They got a party on the field. Michigan alumni, people had rented that space out. Had to have been tons of money. Of course, this DJ is like, listen, I'm going to get paid no matter what. So he's got the stuff going on. And there are like 5 Michigan people there. And so Jeff and I are doing show. Jeff was with me, our post-game show with like the biggest celebration in the background, at least what was supposed to be that. And there's like 6 Michigan people doing it. So that's probably the closest I've come personally to that particular experience.
Yeah, I've heard of all those parties exist. That night, there was fireworks were crazy that night.
That's
too,
right. That's right.
A reporter from Savannah, she got burned from one of that embers or whatever it is coming down and getting her. I was sitting under the stadium editing, but yeah, that was a good win. Mike MacDonald also involved there.
That's exactly right. Very good. It all comes full circle. That's why Cody's such a pro. He brings it right back to where we started. Very good stuff. And by the way, like fireworks are one of those things where, not to go on too much of a tangent here, where like people act like they're not dangerous at all, but they really are dangerous. I mean, in my old neighborhood, a house got burned down by fireworks. But it's before I lived there. But everybody in the neighborhood did a story. burned to the ground because of fireworks. I want to say there was a yard fire in my current neighborhood because of that this year. I want to say, rumor mill led you to believe, people getting injured. It's always amazing to me, like, people have just decided that fireworks are no big deal, nothing to worry about. And yet you constantly hear stories about bad things that happen because of fireworks, including a young lady from Savannah getting injured during the Orange Bowl. Cedric Graham says, will Georgia have a spring game this year? After a whole big thing about gambling, I'll just say this, that if I could go into Kalshi or Poly Market or one of these prediction markets, and if I had to put something up right now, I'd put no G-Day on that. Doesn't mean there won't be, but if I was making a prediction, I might predict no. Now, Texas did just announce they are having one, so maybe that's a good sign that some of these teams are going to go ahead and do it. Even though there's no spring portal window, my assumption is there is still some apprehension about will players try to push transfers without a portal window, and legally, can they do that? Obviously these are, complicated questions, but I think there's still enough apprehension that I believe we may just see some of this go away. Last year was a step towards that with the game not being televised, not even streamed. And it would be easier to take that next step this year. I could be wrong, but once again, if I was going on Poly Market right now or Kalshi, one of these deals, that's the prediction I would put up. Let's see what else. Curtis Jackson says, the guy who sang the national anthem last night looks like Jeff Sentell. Is that Charlie Puth? Is that his name, Charlie Puth? I have no idea who that is. And look, there are some like celebrity things that I do know, and there's some that I don't. I know some things you think I might not, and I probably don't know some things you think I probably should. But I have not heard of Charlie Puth at all. I do know a lot of people because, like, once again, like, on the one hand, I'm like, talking about how much the gambling talk, then I'm going to give another gambling point here. The whole world, all of the online chatter was that this national anthem was going to go over. This is one of those things that does leak, typically speaking. And, for the most part, you can't really get rich betting the national anthem linked because the books just don't allow it. Because, the books know it's very easy for this to leak. And I didn't see the anthem last night, but the world on the internet had decided that Charlie Puth was going to have a choir. And a choir meant over because you're not going to bring in a bunch of extra singers and then rush your way through the national anthem. So if you go on message boards or, social media platforms where the gambling talk pregame was prevalent, the entire world thought the national anthem was going to go over. And I don't think it did, right? I think it went well under the predicted time. So there you go. I condemn the Super Bowl broadcast for gambling talk. Now I've given you three fairly, deep in the weed gambling points here. Let's see what else. Army Dog says people actually betting on the color of the Gatorade. That's wild. It's one of the most bet things. It really is. I mean, the Gatorade color is huge. And I think the Super Bowl is the only time you can bet the Gatorade color. I'm thinking, it's huge. And here is a point, and like, I'm being serious about this. For people who like doing this kind of thing for fun, you got to judge your own, I guess, like, how mad are you going to be? Because, whatever color it is, it's up to whoever you place the bet with, they get to determine what color it is. And so, like, lime green and yellow, I would say look pretty similar. Red and orange, depending on whatever, can look somewhat similar. You got to, like, a lot of times this is in dispute. Now, there's several schools of thought about the Gatorade color, about, like, nobody uses red because red stains the jerseys. And, like, there's a bunch of different schools of thought as it relates to this. This is also one of those things that does leak every now and then. People either feel like they know because so-and-so team uses the same color, or or it just one of those things just gets leaked. This is one of those things that can. This is a market where you can have some insider trading. Therefore, you also can't bet that much money. But the national anthem's the same deal, because I want to say the betting houses have different rules as to like what constitutes a start and a stop. And so if like, just depending on like, say, like how long you hold off on like that home of the brave at the end, that some of these more popular bets do leave open a lot of room for dispute, and those disputes are a thing that happens. So this is Charlie Puth and Jeff Sentell. I mean, the reason why people say that is because, everybody's got a unique hair thing, and every now and then, while it's not doing that picture, Jeff does have the little flip thing that sometimes shows up in his hair right there. It's not. Charlie does have that there. They do have some natural curl to them. So I would say hair-wise a little bit similar. Are we saying that? What do you think, Cody? Do they look? Do they? I mean, if anything, Jeff's more handsome than Charlie Puth is. Are we thinking that Charlie and Jeff look similar there? Is Charlie Puth, by the way, wearing a members only jacket? That feels like something from the 80s. What do you think, Cody? Charlie and Jeff, are they similar?
I agree. Jeff, much more handsome.
Yeah, Jeff.
He does not have perfect pitch. Right? Charlie Puth apparently can hear any sound and know what note that is. Really impressive. Jeff knows a lot about recruiting. Check him out Wednesday night.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. I mean, what is it the kids say? Mogging? I feel like that Jeff is mogging Charlie Puth in that picture. See, you never know.
You're so hip.
I don't know who Charlie Puth is, but I know what mogging means. So there you go. All right, let's see what else. Talking Rock says I could care less about college round ball or the NBA. This is going back to the topic from a little earlier. Yeah, when I was younger, I used to love the NBA. And I used to know a lot about the NBA. Like I was into like the blogs and stuff like that. I was pretty deep into it. I couldn't tell you who's on what team anymore. Like that's one of those things where, look, and some of y'all are younger, when you get to have kids and like a job and stuff like that, you just can't hold on to it all anymore. Like you just got to give some of it up. And that's one of those things. I just gave it up. And I'm telling you right now, like the Oklahoma City Thunder, the reigning champions, I do know SGA. I know who that is, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I don't think I know a single player other than SGA on the reigning champs. SGA and OKC, I don't believe I know another player on the reigning champs. And if you ask me to give you the 10 best teams by record in the league right now, I'd be guessing, as likely to get it right as get it wrong. I don't have any idea. So now college basketball, I still do have a little room for that in my life. I still like college basketball. I don't follow it quite as closely anymore, but I still like it. Tony Huff says the Superman curl. Yeah, Jeff does have, like I have like a little bit of a thing you call like a cowlick, like right here. My hair wants to make a little bit of a shelf right here. Like it would have been great in the 80s when everybody had like the really big, kind of, just really big hair. I would have done great in a big hair era. Now I have less hair now than I used to. But I would have been great in a big blow-dried, big hair era. I would have been great in that televangelist type look. I would have been great with that. Jeff has a little bit more, like you said, can have a little Superman curl show up. I think that's why people were saying Charlie Puth and Jeff were similar. Yeah, G. Gray says he watches less NBA than he used to. Kenneth Holt says gamblers should study the weak, strong, and semi-strong efficient market hypothesis, something I studied from my time in accounting. By the way, speaking of accounting, Kenneth got some of that too. That's pretty interesting. Dean Alley says, I used to be a do whatever you want as long as it doesn't affect me guy, but now I think gambling should be illegal. So I will say that I know where Dean Alley's coming from, because here's what I'll tell you. y'all know, I mean, we do go with the flow around here. I like making predictions. I think some of this stuff is pretty entertaining. And frankly, in some respects, it can make a pretty boring game slightly more interesting. So I don't consider myself to necessarily be anti-gambling. But I cannot believe how prevalent it is. I cannot believe. And did y'all see the thing with like Giannis the other day? And I'm not accusing Giannis of fraud, but there was all this talk about, will Giannis get traded? And look, these prediction markets, and I forget which one he's now working with, whether it's Kalshi or Polymarket, but you can go on there and people are making their own trade options with, getting traded to the wherever and the blah, blah, blah. And I guess now he's not getting traded. Or did the trade deadline come and go? And so you've got all this action wagered on, is Giannis going to get traded? Now, listen, I know just not to be dangerous about any of this. I told you before, I don't even follow the NBA that closely. But my understanding is now Giannis is not getting traded. And after all this action on the prediction market exchange, come to find out he is now working as a paid endorser for one of these two, whether it be Kalshi or Polymarket. Honestly, don't know which one. And once again, I'm not making an accusation because I don't know enough to do so. But boy, that's a suspicious looking thing. And I guess that's just what we do now. I guess that, that just seems that seems tricky. That seems pretty tricky. So I'm a little bit like D. Nelly in the fact that I don't think throwing a few dollars down on a game is that big of a deal. I don't. But the overwhelming preponderance of gambling talk to the point where it's like, there were a large stretch of this game last night that I thought that's all they were really talking about were player props and things like that. I mean, this was a game in service to the gamblers. I don't know, man. That's tricky, especially given the fact that, what the gambling houses want you to do now is they want you to take all these player props and they want you to compile them into what they call a single game parlay. And if you go on one of the big ones, and y'all know what the really, really big ones are, not legal in Georgia, but we have a lot of people that live in neighboring states, and these are, legal in, some of our neighboring states. It's almost hard to place a wager that's not a single game parlay. They just keep feeding you towards the single game parlay because they make the single game parlay just sound easier to win. I mean, mathematically, it's almost impossible to win. And they make it seem like, well, it's not that big of a deal. All I got to do is have this guy go over, that guy go under, and blah, blah, blah. And I've won my single game parlay. And the odds, pay it out at what you think. Oh, I can wager a little and have a chance to win a little bit more. It just seems a little bit more exciting. But they are just raking cash on these because people can't tabulate the odds in their head of how unlikely these are to win.
I was amazed. How did they afford so many Super Bowl commercials?
Right? Yeah.
There was like 4 of them in the first 3 commercial breaks. And I was like, oh, yeah, because people are terrible at this and they are making tons of money.
Yeah. So and Cody's right about that. I mean, DraftKings, FanDuel, they are everywhere. And they've clearly stepped. What's going to happen is once we figure out who the number 3 player in the game is, a lot of this stuff's going to go away. Because DraftKings and FanDuel are so far out in front of everybody that there is still room for a number 3 player. And once there's a number 3 player established, at that point in time, a lot of this advertising is going to dry up. Right now, we're still only a few years removed from, is it PASPA, whatever the name is, of the law that basically created legalization nationwide. And it's a mad dash for market share after that. Well, as you know, FanDuel, DraftKings already had the infrastructure in place because they were formerly gigantic advertisers in the daily fantasy space. They owned that. And when it turned into legalization of sports gambling, they just slid right into that. So they are so far out in front of the rest of the market that they almost can't even see their competition. And then after that, there's a battle for number 3. Is it going to be a traditional sports book like, say, Caesars, MGM, something like that. Is it going to be one of these daily fantasy players, which have a little bit different, legal parameters? Is it going to be one of these prediction markets, which somehow are illegal in all 50 states, which I do not understand how that is going. But once we have figured out who the number 3 player is going to be, then a lot of the advertising at that point in time is going to dry up because the market will be established. But that talk is everywhere. By the way, Mike Bobo Stinks, one of our usernames, says the hoodie is a safe choice because there's no bacon collar. Yeah, like the good thing about like the little, fleecy things like this is like it's hard to tell if it's wrinkled. Like I picked this thing up off the floor today, but you can't really tell because it's got a nice gray to it. All right, let's do one more trip around the country. Actually, it's late. We don't have time for a full trip around. All right. Fun conversation, everybody. Thanks for being here. Hope you all have a great day. To our DawgNation friends, sorry the chat wasn't working during the show today, but we appreciate all of you being here, and hope you have a great day. Come back and see us tomorrow. R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can trust them on that, including you're getting some new life out of your old furnace. And still got winter that's around here, and finding a way to save as much money as you possibly can. Of course, that's the kind of thing you want to do. R.S. Andrews can get you even more life out of the heating system than even the manufacturer thinks you're going to be able to get. That's what they do. That's what they've always done. They can do that for you as well. So please find them online. Extend the life of that old unit. Get some new life out of it. R.S. Andrews can perhaps show you how online, rsandrews.com. Also, back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will look forward to talking to you then.